British government's very keen to poison people in cathedral cities with nerve agents. Yeah, they're always doing that.
But if they wanted to blame it on the Russians, that'd be the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the sort of, it looks like a false flag, you know.
Really, what he's talking about is narrative control, which is essentially that there are cultural narratives that are presiding, and you have people who are skeptics and you have people who are true believers. And that's what happens when your narrative becomes detached from reality, is that you have people who double down and people who totally disassociate. Hello, everybody. Douglas Murray has been the hottest thing on this corner of the internet right now, and nowhere has he been hotter than this video from the main Pangburn channel, where Douglas Murray says that the Russians did it. We're going to take a quick reaction, we're going to break it down, see what Douglas is trying to say, and also explain why it's just so dang popular. Let's get into it.
Let me give you one example, if I may, which has been much on my mind recently. Russia. Okay, I've written a lot on foreign policy and international affairs, but Russia happens not to be a specialism of mine, but I'm interested in it. I have quite a lot of friends involved. And something remarkable has happened in recent years. There was a time in the last decade when it was really very hard to alert people to Vladimir Putin's nefarious activities. People didn't really care that much. They poisoned somebody on the sushi shop opposite where I was living at the time, but it was like, oh, well, you know, that's the Russians. And so it was sort of hard to wake people up about that subject, about kleptocracy in Russia. And then we got to this weird stage where absolutely everything that happened that some people didn't like was blamed on Russia. Now it's really hard to persuade people that Russia is doing anything. They either say that it is controlling the entire world, every single plebiscite, every vote is organized by the Russians and so on, or they just believe that the FSB and its sister organizations are just sort of sitting around throwing paper darts at a wall somewhere in Moscow.
Douglas Murray is hitting the nail on the head here, and we actually talked about it on the Pangburn Update, the show that we host on Sunday nights. And he's getting at a theme that's just kind of really been the explanation for most of what the West has been doing, and it's this idea of overcorrection. Fundamentally, he's pointing out that there was a very real problem regarding Russia, and the problem is that everybody shrugged their shoulders even though they were evil. But now we've overcorrected for that. We've now made them the boogeyman and everything, and the consequence is that now when they really do stuff, they get away with it. It's a boy who cried wolf situation, ultimately. And we've become that because we thought we were too lazy to begin with. And again, there's a million different examples for this. We watched something on the Pangburn Update where Murray was talking about Germany's very restrictive speech laws because they're afraid of Nazism. Well, it's understandable that they would be. That was definitely a horrific time in history and something that they shouldn't exactly feel good about. But their overcorrection is doing great harm as well. And the West does this in a million ways. There was things wrong with the old familial system, or at least the intensity in which it was enforced. And so the overcorrection is to try to blow up familial systems. There's problems with the economy. There's places where it could be more generous or places where it could be more forgiving. But instead, we overcorrect and make things worse. And the West keeps doing this. And it keeps doing this because fundamentally we've lost pride in Western civilization. We've lost the idea that it was even good to begin with and not, just a rapacious, kind of relativistic power structure that just happened to rise for no really good reason. And when you believe that sort of stuff, overcorrection isn't really a risk for you because, hey, if we're damaging the power structure, that's good. If the Jenga tower falls down, that's just fine because there's not much worth preserving anyway. But if you're like me, who actually thinks Western civilization is pretty much a miracle, but can also recognize that, it's like any other organization of humans ever. It is full of mistakes, historically and otherwise. Then you will understand exactly why Douglas Murray is resonating so frequently. It is possible to recognize that bad things happened in the past and not want to blow up the structure responsible in the now, because we recognize that we are not defined only by our mistakes. And this idea of overcorrection might be a little bit too generous because it assumes that the destruction caused by the overcorrection is accidental. For some, I'm sure it is. For the people who are pushing narratives, I'm not so sure.
And it's very, very hard to find people in between these two places who are willing to pay any attention to specific things that the Russians are doing and have been doing.
And good job on him for pointing this out. So while the overall trend is of overcorrection, right, and that creates a boy who cried wolf situation, which means, well, why would you believe them when they blame everything on this boogeyman that's fake, right? When you blame everything that has ever been wrong in modern society on racism, when you blame everything on class or everything on this or everything on that, it's very true that that shouldn't be looked at with that much credibility. Maybe not the same credibility it would have been looked at 20 years ago when people were prone to cry wolf less often. But to his point as well is that the downside, one of the other um, negative side effects, as along with just the discrediting of Western civilization, is also the fact that when you do mean it, when something is actually racist, when something is actually done by the Russians, nobody believes you. So this is something that the West has to figure out now, sooner rather than later, or it's going to completely destroy. It already is almost completely destroying our sense of identity and is eating away at our sense of shared reality.
So that when, for instance, sorry to be local about this, but when in this charming cathedral city of Salisbury, a former Russian spy and his daughter are attempted assassination with a really specific nerve agent, people are like, well, it could have been the British government. Oh yeah, the British government's very keen to poison people in cathedral cities with nerve agents. Yeah, they're always doing that.
But if they wanted to blame it on the Russians, that'd be the perfect way to do it.
Yeah, exactly. It's the sort of, it looks like a false flag, And I didn't, as I say, and I'm not a Russia expert, so I don't have time to look at every single issue of it. I'm just aware that we're losing the reasonable place in which a reasonable discussion would be had, and that's just on one issue.
I think the best thing about this is that whatever.
So again, we've already talked about overcorrection, and he's right, but really what he's talking about is narrative control, which is essentially that there are cultural narratives that are presiding, and you have people who are skeptics and you have people who are true believers. And that's what happens when your narrative becomes detached from reality, is that you have people who double down and people who totally disassociate. This is why when you have large-scale cultural narratives, it is necessary to keep them close to reality. Doing otherwise is basically Icarus flying too close to the sun. Sure, you're going to have some true believers who will do whatever you want them to, but you're also going to have very entrenched opposition. And the people in the middle who are able to believe the narrative when it's right and not believe it when it's wrong, that doesn't exist. Why? Well, because it turns out the average person doesn't have the time to do the research, doesn't have the time to spot check every fact. People talk about education a lot, fixing this. First of all, no, not really. Education, the end all be all. People have differing levels of interest and natural ability for discernment. And while they can be improved, you're not always going to make it equal, because, sorry, that's how the world works. But the second thing is that they shouldn't have to. A society where everybody needs to be hyper vigilant and hyper skeptical of all of the information that are coming from public sources is a society that's sick. I mean, I will recommend to all of you to do your own research and to be hyper skeptical. But in the same breath, I will say, I wish we were in a society where I didn't have to recommend that, where you could believe things or disbelieve things based on mainstream cultural narratives with a fair amount of accuracy. Perhaps that's a utopian vision, but to Douglas's point, that group of people in the middle who are totally unbiased about the cultural narrative and just take everything on a case by case basis. The amount of people who are able to do that and are willing to do that is unbelievably small. Even I don't do it all the time, at least. I only do it like 70% of the time. So again, this idea that, do your own research, it's a good recommendation, but it's not a very realistic one. And it's also not one that we should want to have.
The solution is, it's already started in part because we're now more aware and talking about this. Question comes up almost everywhere we go, or at least me. I'm assuming everybody's concerned about this, or at least a good chunk of people are. And
the people who frequent Matt Dillahunty events, who are people who are already predisposed to be skeptical and to be people who think about ideas quite a lot. You have to understand how small of a subgroup of the population that is. And by the way, even the people who ask about it to Matt Dillahunty probably aren't very good at screening for it or very diligent at screening for it by themselves. So, this is nice and it's better than nothing, but I would say again that this doesn't actually ameliorate the very real problem.
As that concern increases, you'll get people who start to recognize, hey, yeah, the algorithms on Facebook are feeding me all the shit that I want.
Right.
And all the stuff that I clicked on that I liked, and this isn't necessarily true. Or I've been only watching Fox News, or only watching MSNBC, or only watching CNN. I watch all of them,
Yes.
one of them to laugh at, and be
He's kind of betraying himself there. It shows that he's not really an unbiased consumer.
terrified by, because, you know, I like horror movies.
Okay, but sorry, Matt, if you're only watching the counter narrative stuff to laugh at it and not believe it, it's not doing the job that you want it to. That's number one. Number two, again, most people do not want to and cannot do this. So yeah, as always, Douglas Murray hitting the nail on the head. This idea of overcorrection leading to narrative skepticism, or narrative double downing in some cases. You know, he's 100% right. And, you know, but until we heal our society a little bit, we start to agree on what basic reality is. Only then can we tether the narrative to something like reality. Because as it stands, a shared reality isn't really something we have in the West anymore, unfortunately. We disagree on the most basic fundamental things like what is a human life? What is a man? What is a woman? What is a good life generally look like? Is there such thing as moral standards for your personal behavior? Is there anything beyond like just the bare minimum harm principle that we should be promoting? All these questions that are really kind of basic. Again, like you could argue about the details of what those might look like, but again, those questions about should they even exist? Do we even agree on definitions? Regardless of what they might be, in the final analysis in terms of policy. We don't even agree on that. So the idea of having a shared reality, of having a shared society, is kind of by the wayside. And without that, then you don't have any unified reality to tether a narrative to, meaning that you get narratives that spin way off into the sunset, and you get a lot of fake stuff to the point where you get hyperskepticism and Boy Who Cried Wolf, and ultimately it's all just a big overcorrection from a pretty good but flawed scenario that we had back in the proverbial day. Again, this is the internal problem with progress: is that it's a Jenga tower. You want to build it taller, but you don't want to pull something out that's important that will make you lose all of your progress. And we have forgotten about physics, and we're pulling out blocks like mad. And it's not going particularly well. So thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be doing a lot more of these if you like them. See you all next time.